When I left the radio on Friday, we were beginning to deal with the attributes of God. Now, these attributes are a manifestation of God, of a revelation of who God is, and of God's nature and God's divine work. You and I both have attributes, and those attributes are revealed in our personality. So you can have two people and they can be identical twins on the outside. I mean, literally, one is a carbon copy of the other, and yet they are entirely different. And you may not be able to distinguish them by looking at a picture or even by seeing them stand there. But you begin talking to one and then talking to the other, and in very short order you'll say, oh yes, this is the person I know, and that person, though they look identical to this individual, that is not the person I know. That distinction is made in the area of attributes. So the attributes of God present to mankind a revelation of God's divine personality. They reveal who God is. These attributes reveal God's divine nature. The Bible declares that God is love. The Bible also declares that God is a consuming fire. The Bible declares that God is not willing that any should perish. And the same Bible declares that God has made the wicked for the day of judgment. How is it that you and I understand this? We understand this through the revelation in the Bible of divine attributes. These divine attributes, again, are the characteristics of God. God's character, God's nature. Now, all of us have certain characteristics. We walk a certain way. We speak a certain way. We have certain speech patterns. We use certain words in our vocabulary. My grandfather's speech patterns and my speech patterns are not identical. And some of my speech patterns are similar to his, but he had a certain way of framing sentences. I have a certain way of framing sentences, and that would be a reasonable conclusion because his character and my character, his personality, my personality, are not identical. If they were, I would be Harold Seitler, or Harold Seitler would be Ben Carper, and that's simply not possible. Now, the theologians divide this area of the characteristics of God, or the attributes of God, into two divisions. These are incommunicable and communicable. Now, that's a $5 theological word. Don't let that frighten you. It's good for you to add these kind of words to your vocabulary. Now, you hear often about communicable diseases. We've heard something about that since COVID, and incommunicable diseases. All right, we'll just think of it in that framework. The incommunicable attributes of God are attributes that belong only to God, whereas the communicable attributes of God are those attributes that He has placed of Himself, that He has placed into the human family. We go back to the book of Genesis, where in Genesis chapter number 3 we read, and God said, let us, chapter 2 rather, God said, let us make man in our image and after our likeness. So those communicable characteristics of Almighty God, attributes of God, were put into mankind in creation. Not all of them, but some of them were put into man in creation. Now we ask, what are some of these incommunicable and communicable attributes? Well, the incommunicable attribute of God is that God exists in and of Himself. That's why God is God. But God in creation has placed into man a sense of morality. Every man, men love darkness rather than light because their deeds are evil. We ask the question, who told them their deeds are evil? And nobody had to tell them their deeds are evil. They know that from childhood. They know that coming out of the womb. That's why David said that we come forth from the womb speaking lies. Because God has communicated, God is a moral God. And God has communicated the area of morality into the human family. So whenever we think of God, we think of attributes that belong only to Almighty God. This would be the fact of His self-existence, that God exists in and of Himself, the simplicity of God, that God is, and beside Him there is none other, the infinity of God. God inhabits eternity. I can't comprehend that. The heavens are my throne and the earth is my footstool. His eternality, there's never been a time when God has not been, and there'll never be a time when God shall not be. And His immutability. I am the Lord, I change not. Therefore, ye sons of Jacob are not consumed. I read in the Bible, Jesus Christ, the same yesterday, today, and forever. These are attributes that belong only to God. No man possesses any of these attributes in and of himself. And simply put, I pointed this out on Friday's broadcast, there are none of us that are self-existent. I depend upon the air I'm breathing right now. Without the air I'm breathing, I would be dead in about 5 minutes. But then I depend upon the water that I drink. If I didn't have the water to drink, I would dehydrate in a couple of days. But if I didn't have the food to eat, I would starve to death in a couple of weeks. And right on and on we could go. There are none of us that are self-existent. All of us depend for our existence on things that are outside of ourselves. But then when God created man in His own likeness, there are attributes that God possesses that He put into the human family. Among these are wisdom. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and yet God has placed within man the capacity for wisdom. That's why in the Bible I read a warning to not be fools, but to be wise, understanding the time, benevolence. You and I are created, mankind is created to be benevolent to his brother. I'm sorry that we have lost this in society today. But I can remember in my childhood, and that's not been that many years ago, a much more benevolent society than we have today. A society where complete strangers would meet one another on a two-lane road and throw up their hand one at the other. Two cars would arrive at a four-way stop, and one would look over at the other and say, "You go ahead." Where a man would hold a door for a lady and say, "You go ahead," or "You go before me." Benevolence. Number 3, holiness. God is holy. Be ye holy, for I, the Lord, am holy. And God has placed holiness within man. Holiness is the natural position and condition of mankind. And yet man is utterly and entirely away from that. Because all you and I observe now is utter and absolute unrighteousness and unholiness. Justice. We hear that term often. God has placed within man to be just, to do justice, to do right, to be just in his dealings. A 16-ounce weight determines 1 pound, 16 ounces to the pound. 12-inch measurement determines 1 foot. 36-inch measurement determines 1 yard. The area of justice, compassion. I had something unusual happen to me this morning. I noticed one of my dogs was down at the tractor shed on our farm barking. And my wife said, "You might ought to go down there and look and see that animal or somebody is down there in the tractor shed." And so I went down to the tractor shed, and I discovered in there a mangy, starved, hurt dog. And you know, I just had compassion on that dog. And I picked it up, and I was in my coat and tie ready to come to the office. But I picked that dog up in my coat and tie and carried it back up to the house and put it inside the shop and put it in a cage and gave it water. I don't know how long it had been since it had water to drink. Gave it food to eat. Its ribs showing, mange on its back. And my wife said, "We don't need another dog." And I said, "Mama, this one showed up. It looks to me like we've got another dog." I had compassion. I couldn't have hurt that dog or taken that dog's life. I had compassion on that dog. As soon as I saw it, I had compassion. My wife and I have a cat. And that cat thinks it owns our house. But I was preaching up in Virginia, and as a kitten, it was a stray. And well, you know the rest of the story. When I closed the meeting, my wife was with me, and we drove from Virginia back to South Carolina, and my wife had that little kitten in her lap the whole trip back from Virginia back to South Carolina. And that stray cat is now a part of our family, and it comes and it goes as a part of our family. Compassion. But we're living in a day when, because of sin and a desire to divorce ourselves from the Bible, as Paul the Apostle said, there are people that are without natural affection. How in the world a woman could kill an unborn baby in her womb, that part of her body, and she produced the life and gave the life to that baby, and go to the abortion clinic and have that baby aborted. I have yet to understand how that can happen. Such a lack of compassion on people. Then the area of truth. These are communicable attributes that God possesses, that God has put into the human family. And you know, all men, I don't care if you're Democrat, Republican, it doesn't matter. But you know what, at the end of the day, everyone wants the truth. A man that would lie and run for public office and just lie and lie and lie, or a man that would go into business and just lie and lie and lie, but he wants people that he's doing business with to tell him the truth. It's interesting to me that they want no voter ID to vote in the United States, but now all of the unions, the AFL-CIO, and all the other unions demand voter ID of their union members. That they want to do away with the Electoral College and do away with the secret ballot. But anytime the unions who are wanting to do away with the secret ballot elections in the United States or voter ID demand the very thing they want to get rid of in their own elections. Now, the only explanation for that is that all men desire the truth. And the reason they do it is because God, in creation, let us make man in our image, place that within the human family. Now, my time has gotten away from me. I wasn't able to cover nearly the ground I wanted to. But by the grace of God, tomorrow, when we come back, I want to continue dealing with the attributes of God, and I want to deal with two further aspects. There are absolute attributes that God possesses, and then there are relative attributes. And I want to deal with these, as the Lord shall let me, on the Bright Spot Hour tomorrow.